Recording. Wow, here they all come. It's going to be quite a webinar today. I'm Adam Long from the Social Impact Hub, and I'm so excited everybody joining us. This is kind of like the pre-show bit for those of you who were super on time. We didn't want to keep you hanging out in a waiting room, but we're going to get started in just over 2 minutes with the content today for impact measurement in complex organizations featuring Social Impact Hub and the Benevolent Society. So as you're joining, jump in the chat. It's going to be very interactive today. So jump in and tell us who you are, why you're here. What are you curious about today? We want to find out what you're doing. And you know what? If you ask us a question up front, we've got a chance to shape and move the content of today and answer it. If you try and get in right at 2 minutes to one with that really great question, it's a bit harder to jump in. So feel free to jump in, say hello, let us know where you're dialing in from. And we're very excited to have you here. Now, there's been a massive number of registrations for this webinar, so pretty excited to see who shows up. It's kind of like a who's who of the impact sector. I know there's a stack of people from the Social Impact Hub and the Professional Impact Network, which is now over 100 people, which is impressive. We've got non-profits, we've got social enterprises, we've got ones that wow, I've been around for almost as long as a benevolent society, and we've got some startups here as well. So do jump into that chat. Oh, there we go. Maria's the first one. It's always tough to be the first one. So thanks, Maria. Maria's from Travelers Aid in Wurundjeri country. Welcome. Glad to have you here, Maria. So, five incredible speakers are going to be joining us in just over a minute's time. And look, let's get all the questions out of the way that everybody always asks. Will the slides be available? Yes, we are going to record the entire session, and you will be able to watch those afterwards. Can I talk to the speakers afterwards? Yes, add them on LinkedIn, or you can get in touch through the Social Impact Hub if you'd like to connect with them. What other questions do people usually ask? Where's the bathrooms? Well, that's up to you. Can't help you with that one today. So we've just got just over 40 seconds. That timer only works for us sometimes, doesn't it? As somebody said in the waiting room, this wouldn't be a webinar without some kind of technical issue. We'll be kicking off and promise that we will be done at 1 o'clock. So we'll just leave another 30 seconds for a few more people to join. Do jump in the chat. Hello, Jennifer Payne. Hi, Kim Roots. So glad to have you here. Hey, Michaela, and hey, Kalinda. Keep that chat going throughout. So because we do have the five speakers joining us, they'll be able to respond to your questions in the chat as well as sometimes on screen as well. So don't hold back. Don't wait for a gap in the conversation. You can absolutely jump in at any time. Oh, it's a bit like a rocket countdown at this point with 5 seconds to go. Geez, lucky you're all on time because here we go with impact measurement in complex organizations. So glad to have you here. So for those of us kind of in the studio today, I'd like to acknowledge the country from which we're dialing in from, which belongs to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and invite everybody to add into the chat, please. Where are you joining us from? And it's interesting, we'll just go to the next slide, Maya. Interesting as we think about impact and complex organizations, it's worth acknowledging that there was tens of thousands of years of impact on the land and the country by the First Nations that cared and looked after this country. We couldn't even begin to imagine how complex it would be to see the impact of tens of thousands of years, but I do want to acknowledge and respect that. So today's webinar, we'll go to the next slide, Maya, is hosted by the Social Impact Hub, and we're so thrilled to be bringing you these five incredible speakers. Maya Marcus, Debbie Jamison, and Dr. Christina Jaron are from the Social Impact Hub. They're part of our Professional Impact Network, who do our advisory services and our impact education. These were the three that actually led the project with the Benevolent Society, with Jeremy Halcrow, the Executive Director, and Shannon Harvey, the Director of Impact Data and Evaluation, to work on the oldest impact organization in Australia. And the stories they have to share today are really quite incredible. We'll jump to that next slide, Maya. If you want to go deeper on the content today, there is an opportunity to go much deeper coming up in just a few weeks. So we've got 2 full-day courses, Impact Measurement for Professionals, where we'll dive deep into how do you do impact measurement in your organization. And these courses aren't just learning, they're also doing. You'll actually be working on building out your own impact measurement frameworks and approach. So you might want to pull out your camera, take a picture of that QR code. We will sell them the links afterwards so you can get that promo code as well to get 10% off the course fees there. So that's enough for me. Maya, I'll hand it over to you, the incredible Maya Marcus from the Professional Impact Network at the Social Impact Hub. She's also the CEO of Kids in Philanthropy and does a whole range of incredible things. For those of you with your cameras on, thank you for making it interactive. Please give a very visible round of applause for Maya. Maya, over to you.
Thank you, Adam. So much energy, hard to follow, but really excited to be here and really excited to share more about this project that was really such a privilege to be a part of. So today we are going to cover a lot. We're going to talk through the work that we did alongside Benevolent Society to help them design, measure, and communicate their impact. You'll hear from myself and from Debbie and Christina who worked on this project, and then we'll hear from Jeremy and Shannon, sorry. Before we jump in, I do just want to make sure we're all on the same page about what we are talking about when we talk about impact measurement. When we talk about impact, we're really talking about the short, medium, and longer term outcomes of an organization or program. And impact measurement is really just when we actually measure those outcomes. And we do this for so many reasons, some of which we will touch on today, but really at the core, it's about making sure our work is as impactful as possible. To do all of this, there are some key tools that we're going to reference throughout the webinar today, so I just want to give you the rundown on some of them. A theory of change is essentially a visual that communicates the overarching impact story that you want to tell about your organization. And that really sits alongside a program logic that gets you into the detail of the impact that your organization is doing and the impact that it wants to create and the outcomes that it needs to bring about to achieve its intended impact. A common myth in the impact measurement space is that theories of change and program logics are the same thing. They are not. A lot of people may use the terms interchangeably, but that high-level theory of change is really quite distinct from the program logic, and you'll get a little bit more of a sense of that as we go through today. And that program logic is really what steps out the outcomes that are then measured in the next tool, which is the impact measurement framework that really looks at how you're actually going to measure and be able to tell that you are tracking in the right direction towards your intended impact. The other tool is the impact report, a really important tool that really communicates the data and the insights and allows you to shout from the rooftops about all the incredible work that you're doing. Some key tools that aren't mentioned here are surveys and other data collection tools. We're not focusing a huge amount on these today, partially because they weren't part of the scope of this project, but also because a lot of people are already doing surveys, interviews, focus groups. But what a lot of organizations aren't doing is using the tools on this screen. So that's what we're really going to focus on today. So let's jump in. Benevolent Society, it's the oldest charity in Australia and is really the perfect example of a complex organisation. Benevolent does such incredible work, but in so many different areas. It works across disability services, out-of-home care, early childhood, does a lot of family support, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later. But it's doing so much incredible work, and impact measurement can be complex at the best of times with an organisation that has a singular focus or with an organisation that's quite small. And so when we started doing this work, we knew we were in for quite a journey, but we absolutely loved it, and we're excited to talk you through some of that journey today. And we're going to talk it through across these 5 phases. So starting with exploring what was already in place at Benevolent and consulting with the team and the board, then moving into clarifying the problem that Benevolent was solving and trying to articulate the solution that it was providing. We then looked at identifying the impact and the outcomes the organisation is trying to achieve. That moved into developing the impact measurement framework with indicators, data collection methods, and finally implementation, which is really about collecting, analysing and communicating data and insights. And that's really the stage that Benevolent is up to at the moment. And through this journey, we had some really key principles that guided the work we do and guides all the social impact measurement work that Social Impact Hub does. And it's just really about making sure that everything we do is strategic, that it's aligned to the organization's purpose, that it's human-centered. All of our work is really accessible, insightful, sustainable. We only include things that are pragmatic, that are material, that people are actually going to be able to measure. We make sure that the program logic, the theory of change, impact framework is all comparable, it's consistent, it makes sense. And we don't overclaim the impact. The partners we're working with are doing so much incredible things. We focus on what they're really doing and don't try and go too much beyond that. But now we're going to talk through each of those 5 phases I mentioned in a little bit more depth. So I'm going to hand to Christina to talk about the first few phases.
Thank you, Maya. So to start the project, we needed to understand what Benevolent was doing, what it's doing to create impact. So what are its programs? What are the different functions of the organization? What are the activities that Benevolent undertakes? And what are the common threads between parts of the organization and the people and communities they work with that, when you look at it on paper, seem quite distinct? We were also looking for what was already in place relevant to impact measurement in Benevolent. And to do this, we needed to look at best practice literature and research, do a desktop review of what was in place in Benevolent already, and connect with team members from across Benevolent. And we spoke to over 50 people through interviews and workshops. So from this, we found several key findings. Social justice came through really clearly as a key theme that underpins the diverse services that Benevolent offer. Their work, we found, also reflects the social ecological model. So they're looking beyond the individual to consider the individual's familial, community, cultural, spiritual, social, and political contexts. And this helped us to identify 3 levels of impact: the systems change level, community collaboration, and individuals and families. We also found that Benevolent had already done a lot of groundwork on capturing the outcomes for the individuals they serve and was already measuring its impact in different ways. So this project was a good opportunity to build on the work that had already been done and to amplify it. We also learnt that Benevolent was working on its new strategic plan at the same time as this project was underway. So this image here on the slide that you see shows where impact measurement work sits relative to organisational strategy. So you can see that it contributes to and is influenced by organisational strategy and the overall vision of the organisation. So we were in a position where strategic planning and the impact measurement work were happening in parallel, but as discrete projects. And while some may find this daunting, this was actually exciting because it was an opportunity for us to showcase the strategic role that an impact focus can and should have, and which is a hallmark of kind of mature social impact measurement practice. And it ended up working really well. So one of the key findings that I shared on the previous slide was about the 3 levels of impact that Benevolent works in. Identifying those 3 levels as critical to Benevolent's work ended up being significant to the organisation's strategy and also to the impact measurement project. So in a less complex organisation, this phase, this explore phase, could happen quite quickly. But with a diverse and large organisation like Benevolent, it's a lengthy process. And Benevolent recognised that investing in this phase was going to be critical to the project and to the organisation. So we were able to get off to a really great start. Something important to note is that one of the really crucial success factors was having admin support from within Benevolent. So we had dedicated contacts. I want to give a shout out to Talisa and Deb here, who helped to organise meetings, line up calendars, and made sure that things were progressing. And we also held fortnightly meetings between our team and the key stakeholders from Benevolent so that we got regular feedback and also that we could get updates on the strategic planning process. Next slide, thank you. So then we were able to move on to phase 2, clarify. Once we had a really strong understanding of Benevolent, we needed to clarify the problem they were solving and the solution they were delivering and make sure that everyone was on the same page about that. Based on the workshops and the interviews that we had done, we were able to draft initial problem and solution statements and shared this with the team. It took us a while to get these finalised because, as you can imagine, there were different viewpoints across the organisation, and it's an organisation with a really long history as well. But we got to a point that reflected these views, that reflected the history of Benevolent and also that looked to the direction that Benevolent is going in. And a big question that we faced with this project was, should this project and the deliverables associated with it reflect where Benevolent is now or where it wants to be? Should it be current or should it be aspirational? And we had long discussions about this with Benevolent and also with the project team amongst ourselves, and we opted for a blended approach. So this acknowledges that all of this work, all the impact measurement work is ongoing, and it needs to be iterated over time anyway as context change and data comes through. And once we had all of this clarity, then we were in a position to start on phase 3. We could really start looking at what a theory of change would look like for Benevolent. So phase 3, identify. Building a theory of change is about mapping out what an organisation does, which we'd already mostly done through the previous phases, and what it wants to achieve. So we then look at what the changes are that will need to occur in the short, medium and long term that will enable the organisation to achieve its intended impact. The complexity here was that Benevolent is having impact at multiple levels for multiple stakeholders. So the theory of change couldn't just be a list of outcomes. These had to be mapped out at the 3 levels that I mentioned before. And instead of one organisation-wide program logic, which you might see in a less complex organisation, Benevolent needed 3, in addition to program logics for specific initiatives or programs. So you see here that we're really embracing the complexity of the organisation in the work. So on the slide here, you kind of get a snapshot of a theory of change that we developed that offers a full view of what Benevolent does across the 3 levels: systems change, support services for individuals and families, and collaborative and community initiatives. And the theory of change describes the most critical or the priority outcomes related to each of these 3 levels. I also want to draw your attention to the 5 enablers on the side of that slide. This was really interesting. These emerged very clearly from the explore phase, and we grappled for a while with where they fit. We thought they might be short-term outcomes. Some of them seemed like activities. Eventually, through discussion and research, we understood that these were actually the non-negotiables. These have to be in place for Benevolent to generate outcomes. The enablers reflect ways of working. They reflect the values and commitments that Benevolent make through their work. And they underpin everything Benevolent does. And they also help to unify the diversity of programs and activities that Benevolent offers. On this slide here, you can see a snapshot of the program logics that we developed. They dive deeply into the outcomes described in the theory of change. So we created 3 program logics for each level of impact that we identified in the explore phase: individuals and families, collaborative and community initiatives, and systems change. And each program logic maps out the short, medium, and long-term outcomes and the pathway to Benevolent's overall impact. And once we had these in place, we were then able to move on to phase 4, which Deb will talk to you about.
Thanks, Christina. So in phase 4, the develop phase, we were looking at developing 2 key documents. So the first document is the impact measurement framework, and the second document is the data collection plan. In reality, we actually sort of put those 2 pieces together in one document, but that's not really critical. So there were 2 sort of pieces to the work. So the impact measurement framework, what that does is identify the key indicators that we're going to use to measure the progress or the achievement of the selected outcomes. And the data collection plan is sets out how you're going to collect that data, the source of the data, the tools and methods that you're going to use to collect the data, when it's going to be collected, and so forth. The first challenge that we've faced in developing the impact measurement framework was the number of outcomes. So across those 3 program logics that Christina described, there was something like 64 outcomes. And we were developing an impact measurement framework at an organizational level. So you don't want to be collecting and reporting against 64 outcomes at an organizational level. Different parts of the organization would be collecting and reporting and using those outcomes for different things, perhaps for monitoring activities and progress. But at an organizational level, you really want a sort of higher level dashboard of key outcomes. So we prioritized the outcomes from that 64, and we ended up with about 5 or 6 in each of those 3 program logic areas. And we picked the kind of headline outcomes, the ones that really clearly kind of told the narrative, the theory of change narrative story for Benevolent. And so we ended up with, around about 15 or so, 15 to 20 key outcomes. And then we developed, and part of that process was really to look at what's been done already. There was already a significant body of work that had been done, particularly in the individuals and families, measuring impact in that space. So we're looking at indicators that were already being used and tools that were already being used. And we also looked at other validated tools and frameworks that we could bring into this impact measurement framework. And the advantage of doing that, if you're using validated tools, is that you can be confident that if you're using those properly, you're going to have robust data rather than trying to kind of invent your own. Sometimes you have to do that because a validated tool doesn't exist, or it's too complicated, or it's not practical. But where possible, we try to bring those in, and so we could be confident about the evidence base. Then we developed the data collection plan. So this sets out how you're going to collect the data and who and when and so forth. And it was also useful to identify what was already being done, what can be continued and part of the new impact measurement framework, and what can be modified and built on, and what needs to be created new. And this will sort of help to inform the implementation as well. So sort of challenges around that, around collecting around the data collection tools, were that there was already a history, particularly in child and family services, of significant work that had already been done. There was data had been collected over years. So that was being used, for monitoring, for comparison. There was multiple funding body requirements. People were used to certain tools. They were invested in them. People had skills in certain processes that were already being used. There were some technology challenges, which is not unusual. So all of that, we needed to understand all of that so that we were developing a data collection plan that was practical and usable. And also recognizing that you're not going to be implementing it all straight away, overnight. It's something that'll be implemented in a phased process, which I'll talk about next. I think the next slide, we have just an overview of the impact measurement framework and the data collection plan. So these are sort of the key headings that you would see. So this is just for one outcome. So for each outcome, you would identify one or more indicators. So how are we going to measure that outcome? And then set out, where will that data come from? What tools will we use to collect the data? Does it already exist? Who's going to collect it? When are they going to collect it? So you're really down in the nitty-gritty with the impact measurement framework. If we move to the next slide. So the next phase was around implementation, and what's involved in implementation of the impact measurement framework is preparing the organization to start implementing the new framework. It involves, how you communicate with your staff, building capacity of teams to do the implementation, developing guidelines and materials, developing tools, building capacity. It might involve upgrading your IT processes and systems, how you're going to collect that data, how you're going to analyze it, and then how, processes around reporting and showcasing. So implementation is all of those things. Implementation wasn't in the scope of the project, so that's kind of where we handed over to Benevolent to do the hard yards with the implementation. But our involvement with implementation was to provide Social Impact Hub have some great webinars that were available to the Benevolent team. We talked to the working group about what would be helpful for us to provide to assist with implementation, and provided a fairly detailed handover report. We did a presentation to quite a large group of stakeholders, internal stakeholders, to kind of ready people for the next phase. And we also provided an implementation checklist around key activities at different phases of implementation. So I'm going to hand back to Maya, who's going to introduce Benevolent and talk a little bit more about and see how things were going with the implementation.
Thanks, Debbie, and thank you, Debbie and Christina. The three of us got quite close working on this project, seeing each other sometimes a few times a week. And it's so great to be back here together presenting on this work. But now we get to hear from Jeremy and Shannon, who are really some of the pivotal stakeholders from the side of Benevolent and really made this work possible, but we're in very different roles. But I'd love to start with you, Jeremy, and hear a little bit about why Benevolent actually chose to start work on this impact project.
Thanks, Maya. I guess the short answer is that we had 4 key goals in mind. Firstly, we wanted to focus our mission and keep focused on mission, which is quite a not as easy as it sounds when you're in a large and complex organization. Secondly, we wanted to demonstrate our effectiveness and improve our effectiveness. So I can unpack that a little bit in a minute. Thirdly, we wanted to build trust with our funders and donors. And fourthly, we wanted to embed impact measurement capability within the organisation. And indeed, that's actually why we could have been easy for us to go with consultants that would come in and do a quick and dirty exercise and give us a nice shining product at the end. But one of the reasons we went with Social Impact Hub was your willingness to walk alongside us and actually embed that capability within the organisation. So firstly, the focus on mission question, of course, like many of the organisations on the call, we're called to tackle those wicked problems, alleviate poverty, address inequality, stop children entering the care and protection system, domestic family violence, lots of complex adaptive problems, if you want to use the technical lingo. But the challenge, I think, in organisations, and I've been a CEO, I've been on boards of a number of organisations, and I've seen this before, is that because sometimes organisations get overly focused on the financial sustainability question because that comes in black and white. But by measuring your impact, then you're giving, your stakeholders, your boards, your senior executive data to kind of balance that out. So impact and finance are seen as, in fact, finance being the thing that actually supports the impact, not the other way around. Secondly, demonstrating our effectiveness. We were really keen to understand what was really making a difference for our communities and clients. And that, as I think Christina said earlier, because of where we're at on the strategy development process, was really going to be an important piece of work to help us focus, reflect on our strategic priorities, and know where to allocate limited resources. Building trust with funders and donors. And look, sometimes that issue, I think, is undervalued I think it's more significant than sometimes we give it credit for. I'd had the past experience of leading an organisation, a disaster recovery organisation, through the Black Summer fires. And if you can think back to that time, there was a lot of debate in the media and in the community around, can we trust charities to sort of get the money out the door? But there was a kind of tension there, because get money out quickly, but also at the same time we were being asked to make sure that we were making sure the right people got the money, and it wasn't being defrauded. Long story short, what I sort of at that time, because of that tension, did a bit of a deep dive into what was driving those concerns. So there's things like the Edelman Trust Barometer. You can go and Google that. What that was telling us was that for organisations like us, for not-for-profits and charities, the public perception is the flip side of what it is for for-profit. So no one questions our good intentions, but there's an assumption that we're not competent in the way that we perform. So the for-profits have the opposite problem. It's assumed that we're not slick, that we're not efficient. What measuring impact does is actually prove that we are making a difference, that we are effective in what we do. And then for Benevolent in particular, have had a long history of doing lots of impactful things. We were 100 years ago, we were involved in getting the old age pension up. More recently, we were the first organisation to have a social benefit bond crystallised, Resilient Families. And what we did, we come out of a history of a bit of a famine and feast with our impact measurement capability. So when we were doing the social benefit bond, had a lot of capability, but when that project ended, the capability left the organisation. So as I said before, we were really keen with this project to make sure we were actually embedding impact measurement in the ways of working deep in the organisation. So it's not just reliant on individuals like myself and Shannon. And if we leave, the capability leaves the organisation.
That makes a lot of sense. And, that makes sense why you work with a partner to come on that journey with you. And capability building is such a huge part of what Social Impact Hub does. We started as an education organisation, and so it's a big part of this project. Thanks, Jeremy. Shannon, we've shared a little bit already about how when we started this work, there was so much in place at Benevolent already. I'd love to hear from you a little bit about what was already in place and what this project was building on.
Yeah, sure. I think, Christina mentioned we had our client outcomes framework. So we had, not all across the organisation, but particularly in our child, youth and family programs, which are the bulk of programs in the organisation, we had a pretty strong culture of collecting standardised measures and that sort of thing. What I think, when I came into the organisation, so I've been at Benevolent a little bit over a year, kind of started alongside this project. Someone in my team said to me, I think it was our evaluation lead, said, we're really good at the monitoring, not so much the evaluation learning bit of the MEL, and so I think we were kind of both missing a little bit of like, okay, what do we do next? We're collecting all the data, we're doing some reports, but actually where is that going? And then connecting it also up to all of the other things that we do that aren't just that individual work. So this is where, I think with the support of Social Impact Hub, we got to this sort of ecological model, which we haven't really articulated in any of our impact measurement before, that yes, we're doing great work, practitioners are doing fantastic work on the ground with individuals and families, but actually often it's either the community level partnership work that we're doing that really drives that impact, and it's also our advocacy work that can sometimes make the bigger change that from a small thing in people's lives, right? So I think we were missing that articulation of, although we were doing lots of things, understanding how they work together and measuring that impact as one thing.
That makes a lot of sense. And, you've talked a little bit about this, but do you have any examples, or can you talk a little bit more about those kind of 3 different levels and how valuable it is to be able to now talk about impact on all 3 levels?
Yeah, for sure. I think, just to take a recent example, I was up on the Gold Coast earlier this week with our early learning places colleagues. So they run a range of early learning places across the Gold Coast, which is sort of community hubs targeted at sort of families with kids 0 to 8 years, really trying to make sure that kids get the best start. So early intervention when they need it, but also parenting support, those sorts of things. And that visit came about because, so we haven't done a big flashy launch to the whole organisation of the social impact framework. What we've really been trying to do is kind of target people who we know kind of are interested in deepening this and build it over time, because we don't want the change fatigue to kick in with people of like, yet another framework in the organisation, right? But I did present this to we have sort of an annual or biannual meeting of sort of folks at our management level and above. And I presented the framework and sort of what we're thinking of doing with it. And the manager of the Gold Coast Early Years Places was like, yes, this is what I've been thinking about. Now I understand how we can do it. And so one of my other team members and I went up there earlier this week, and we had some really great conversations with the teams, not just about kind of, how can we kind of do more around gathering the kind of impact from the individual sessions, and particularly group work stuff, which is often hard, but also talking about like, how can we better measure the partnership work that they do? Because it's actually those partnerships that, like the fact that they have great relationships with Queensland Health and have the nurses come in and do the children's checks, like, when we were in one of the centres in Labrador on Tuesday, there was babies coming in and out, getting their health checks. It's those sort of things that actually the kind of the place-based model is what makes it effective. And I think a lot of impact measurement can sometimes go down the track of, well, how do we prove what our bit is? How do we do the contribution analysis? And I think the framework that we created with you really helped us to articulate that we're not actually interested in our individual contribution in our little slice, because it is the fact that we're working in partnership that delivers the impact that all of our organizations have together. And you can't actually separate it out that nicely. So, so that's kind of given us a framework to then, with these particular services that we're working on, to go, okay, well, what are the measurements we would use? And in the impact measurement framework that Debbie mentioned, you gave us some sort of tools that we can use in terms of, getting information from the folks that we work with. But also then thinking about our advocacy work as well, the systems change work. So at the same time, when we were up there, we had a call with our director, our executive director, so Jeremy's peer, who does our systems change, communications, advocacy type work, to talk about how we could pilot some of the kind of children's participation work that they're doing there in the early years places, and use that to kind of feed into our advocacy around the importance of place-based work and community hubs and that sort of thing. So it helps us to kind of say, if we're not just measuring on the ground, but actually we're measuring at each level, and those things are connected, and we need them all in order to do this work well.
That's such a beautiful example. And the work that is being done in those early year hubs is so powerful. And, I think for Christina and Debbie and I, it's such a privilege that we have been able to add some value to that work, and, helps make sure you can really measure and communicate that impact.
Yeah, for sure.
Jeremy, one of your roles, or your key role in this project, was really as executive sponsor of the project. And that was such an important success factor and really enabled a lot of the work to happen in the way that it did. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what it was like being that executive sponsor.
Thanks, Maya. I mean, I'd probably be the first to claim that, my involvement wasn't the entire success factor by any stretch. So I think firstly, it's important to have a CEO whose vision foregrounds impact. That's critical to keep the organisation focused and energised. Secondly, you need buy-in from the board, and we were very fortunate to have a board that was willing to resource this project and invest in measuring impact. And indeed, we've got a real champion of impact measurement and evaluation on our board, Robin Milden, if anyone's come across Robin from the sector. And then, but in terms of, I think my role, it was really critical at sort of 3 phases. Firstly, at the beginning, then in the middle, when you sort of hit the pit of despair, which comes about inevitably. And then I think thirdly, at the end, now we're into the implementation phase and making sure that this project isn't sort of sitting alone as a silo piece of work, but is, as we've already mentioned, integral to the strategy moving forward. In that early phase, in that first phase, so as Shannon's already mentioned, they joined Benevolent only a year ago in June, but actually this project commenced at the end of 2023. So that first part of the project where we were pitching it to the board, ensuring we had the that board investment during the procurement process, that was all led by myself, that initial phase. And of course, in parallel, as you can probably guess, I was recruiting the team and recruiting Shannon to lead the project and making sure we had the right technical expertise in the organisation through Shannon and their team to actually deliver and implement on, you know, it's all well and good to have a shiny theory of change, but you've actually got to have that capability sitting behind it. Then, as inevitably happens, there's always a bit of skepticism in the organisation. And I think as everyone's already heard, the others mentioned, it was actually quite complex moving the organisation away of thinking. Our organisation, like many others, tends to think in business silos. So disability, aging, child and family, and moving the organisation away from that, it started to hit some skepticism. So to sort of push through, make sure that people, the senior leadership, are still committed to the project, really critical, having that executive lead role. That said, executive lead is not an unusual role for us. We've got quite a mature project management approach, and all our projects would have an executive lead. So that's just a part of the way we do things. And then, as I said before, at the end of the project, I think, you know, it's been mentioned before. I think Christina mentioned it before. This has become this work is sort of led into kind of framing how we're thinking about our strategy moving forward. That wasn't intended that way. In fact, the strategy development stuff got delayed a little bit. So I think one of the unintentional learnings from us is if you're going to do this, do your theory of change work first as a way to lead into the strategy development piece. It's been great how that's worked out, but as I said, we didn't actually plan it that way. And what it's meant is that we've now framed our strategy around that that micro, meso, macro. So our 3 of our pillars are micro, meso, macro. So the first one on sort of individual safety and well-being, then the community and partnership and addressing social inclusion piece, and then the third pillar is our impact and systems work. So not using the technical language, but sort of following that flow.
Thanks, Jeremy. And very humble about your role. There were obviously a lot of success factors, but I think, you know, Benevolent always has that executive sponsor, and we really encourage all organisations to have that role. And we got very lucky with the timing of the impact measurement and the strategy, but we do recommend it to all organisations to really have that theory of change in place, so impact guides your organisational strategy. Jeremy mentioned the pit of despair. I'd love, Shannon, to hear a little bit about your experience of the pit of despair and some of the challenges that came along with this project.
I mean, I think I would say pit of despair is maybe a little bit strong, but there was definitely a point, I would say probably like a third of the way into the project, Jeremy mentioned we didn't just want a shiny product, we actually wanted to engage with it properly. And we spent a lot of time on the theory of change piece. And I think maybe some of us in leadership had probably assumed that that would be fairly straightforward and we knew what we were doing and what we wanted. And you'd done this consultation process with quite a lot of our staff, and we had all that come in. But then we ended up with several rounds of conversations with our senior leadership and our executive team that really highlighted not fundamental differences, but just like those little differences between people's understanding of what we're here to do and how we talk about it, that actually we probably all kind of made some assumptions about that other people thought about it in the way that we did, or that it was simpler than we thought it was. And so those conversations were quite difficult, and it felt like we were just kind of going around in circles for a little bit. And I remember my colleague Janet, who's no longer at Benevolent, but was also on this project with me. I remember being in a meeting, and she reminded us that when we checked your references for Social Impact Hub, one of the teams that you previously worked with said, look, at one point they gave us some advice and we decided not to take it. And looking back, I really wish we had. I really wish we'd just stuck with the process and followed it, because we would have got a better outcome. And having had that said to us by your referees was really helpful, because that kind of, and Janet reminding us, we kind of thought, yeah, let's just stick with this process. Let's trust that they've been through this before and they can help us get through. And that's what got us through to away from kind of our silos bit through to seeing this ecological model and framing it in that way, and also helped us to kind of, have some difficult conversations, but also maybe just let some things go, right? So yeah, I think, and the reason that I know we got there is that, as was mentioned, we were going through a strategy process at the same time, and they kind of lined up quite nicely. So earlier in the project, Christina said, well, really you should do your theory of change before you do your strategy. And I was like, yeah, like I agree with you, but I have no control over the board and the exec and all of that. They'll do their strategy, whatever, But as it turned out, the theory of change process and doing that was so meaningful for people, that actually what we see in the strategy that we've got now, which will be more public soon, is really a reflection of what's in that theory of change. So I think we know that we got there, and that actually then that is reflected in where we're heading over the next period of time. And it really then informed those conversations with the board about strategy as well, that the executive team had, and maybe Jeremy can talk more about that. But yeah, so we got there, but you really do have to push through the hard stuff and not take the easy route out, I think.
Absolutely. And it's worth the investment to get where you want to go. It just takes a bit of time. And I'd love to hear, Shannon, I'm going to have a question and tying one of the questions from the chat about kind of where you are up to now with implementation. And then from the chat, how long do you think it will be until you've completed implementation, if completion is even, the goal, and what kind of investment that's been at a high level?
Yeah, look, I don't see it as something that is a project to be implemented and there's an end date. I think we're really approaching it as an iterative process. When Debbie was showing you the impact measurement framework and said that was quite detailed, like we've had to take that down then now to a much granular detail of like which services are collecting which information and where and who are we reporting it to and all of those sort of things. As I mentioned, we kind of went, rather than going for a flashy, we're launching the social impact framework, it's rolled out, we're rolling it out to everyone, here's your timeline. There's already so much change going on in the organisation, and we didn't want it to feel like another thing that was coming down centrally, when actually we know the framework itself is grounded in the way that people are already working. So what we focused on in terms of my team's work plan for rolling things out is the areas of the organisation where things were a little bit weaker in terms of impact measurement. So in this year, focused on our aged care services, and particularly there's a huge amount of change federally around the new support at home. So making sure that they're capturing impact, but also that they've got their consumer advisory board set up, that we're feeding in information from our impact measurement into those. We've got a reflective process going on. That's the really important bit for us. And kind of the community level measurement and measuring our systems change work. So we're really trying to focus on where we've got weaknesses so that we can flesh that out a little bit more, and improve the value of it, I think. And then make sure that people are actually integrating it into the work that they're doing and reflecting and using it for that purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, impact measurement is ongoing. As Jeremy said, it really started, you know, at the end of 2024, 2023, and it's been an ongoing journey, but the client outcomes framework started before then. The implementation is going to be ongoing. And there's never really a, oh, tick, we're done with impact measurement. You're always learning, iterating, and really evolving from there. Jeremy, I don't know if you wanted to jump in on Shannon's point around the kind of board involvement and that input.
Yeah, look, I think I touched on that before, and I can see there's a question in the chat around budget for capability build. It's sort of a slightly complex question to answer because this was one part of a larger transformation budget that the board invested in around that included data governance, but also integration of our various, because we are a complex organization, we got lots of CMSs. So there's a bit of technology there, and we also did a very significant piece of transformation around our aging CMS and ways of working. So long story, not relevant to this. So there was a multi-million-dollar budget, but it had a lot of other components to it. That said, part of the planning was to recruit, and as I've mentioned, obviously Shannon was part of this, but also some members of Shannon's team. So recruit that capability, and then as the transformation project wound down, actually embed that capability in business as usual, which is where we're at now. So Shannon and Shannon's team are now you know, part of the BAU budget of the organisation going forward. But it just sort of allows you to kind of speed up that capability build by having that board commitment and board investment.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. I'm sure interesting detail for people on the call. Any final advice, Jeremy, for other organizations that are sitting here being like, oh my God, can we do this? How do we start? Where do we go?
Probably just encourage people to give it a go. I just think it doesn't take the kind of level of investment necessarily that the Benevolent has done. You know, start with what you've got. You know, build on the outcomes measurement or the output measurement that you're already doing. I think it's really helpful to, you know, engage, you know, a partner like we have with Social Impact Hub. There are other partners you can talk to as well. Of course, I would recommend Social Impact Hub. But probably the other thing for organisations like ours that are more complex, I think, you know, probably the main challenge for us is always, you know, you've always got programs that are coming in fresh to the organisation. You've always got parts of the business that might be winding up, whether you win or lose tenders. And for us, we were doing a major, over the last year, major divestment of our NDIS therapies business. That can be a bit of a roadblock to sort of taking on a project like this. You want to kind of feel that you've got a settled organisation. I think our experience that we've done this project at the same time as sort of divesting a major part of our organisation sort of proves that you can do it. And so there's no time like the present to get cracking on impact measurement.
Amazing. What great encouragement, Jeremy. And I promise we didn't tell Jeremy to promote us. It just happened. Shannon, any final advice from you? Your role is so close to this work every day.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is kind of what I was saying before, but like, I would, like, don't let the kind of enormity of it stop you starting something. And I think really accepting, and I think we also got to this with our theory of change. It's like a theory of change is also a living document. All of it is living, and that actually the process of doing helps you to continue refining that over time. So I think it, and it's also not going to be perfect, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, we've got all the answers now to how to do impact measurement in complex organizations, and we can prove all of our, you know, all of our impact everywhere perfectly. Like, it's actually just being willing to engage in this learning process, and also, you know, start somewhere.
Amazing. Well, I have to hand back to Adam in a second, but just want to say a huge thank you to Jeremy and Shannon for sharing. Not many organizations are happy to kind of reveal the behind the scenes, and it's such a powerful process to go through with you, and to be able to share the insights just extends the impact of the work in and of itself. So thank you. And thank you to Christina and Debbie, and back to you, Adam.
Thank you. Took a moment to find the unmute button. That was absolutely incredible. There were so many gold nuggets throughout that. So, oh, what am I sharing? I don't even know. There were so many gold nuggets throughout that session. So thank you so much to each of you. Maya, that was an incredible overview and introduction. And Christina and Debbie, both of you have so many insights to bring to this process. Jeremy and Shannon, hearing your personal stories and experiences is so valuable, because so many others of us out there are thinking, how do we get started? Where do we turn? How do we navigate all our stakeholders? And you just being open and so generous with your experiences has been absolutely so valuable. So could everybody please join us with your best emoji reaction or visible applause, however you'd like to do it. Thank you so much to each of you for this incredible experience today. And of course, if you would like to go deeper, coming up soon is our impact measurement one-day courses. That's impact measurement for professionals, where you'll be working on the projects, on your own framework, on your own process. So do grab that little QR code now. It'll also be emailed out shortly after this webinar. There is another opportunity to go deeper, and that is to work with our Professional Impact Network. So Debbie, Christina, and Maya are all members of the Professional Impact Network. So am I. They're the best ones, though, when it comes to impact measurement, that's for sure. And you can engage and work with them. Just get in touch with us. If you also, we have a little opportunity at the moment. If you're currently a disability service provider, we've received some funding to subsidize some work to help organizations recruit a person with disability onto their board. So if that's you, do get in touch. But we're wrapping up shortly. Today's been hosted by the Social Impact Hub as one of our services. We're both a B Corporation and a foundation, here to help organizations like yours and the Benevolent Society. It is such a privilege to do this work every day across advisory, across our education work, and mobilizing capital as well. So thank you so much for joining us. We're finishing right on time, not a minute over anybody's lunch break. Thank you again to Maya. Thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Shannon. And thank you, of course, Jeremy. It's been an absolute pleasure. See you all next time.